Paula was born in Venezuela on September 6, 2015. Her parents were Andrina Bermudos Milian from Maturin, Monagas, and Leonardo Salazar from Tucupita, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A month after Paula's birth, the couple decided to immigrate to Ecuador with their daughter, seeking a better life for themselves and their daughter. A month after arriving in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, the family's relationship soured for a variety of reasons. Andrina broke up with Leonardo, and soon afterward took Paula with her to Cuenca, the country's third largest city. There, she lived with Paula and her best friend, who graciously offered to let her and the girl stay in the house while they looked for a new place to live and work. Given the breakup and other circumstances, the girl's father, Leonardo, chose to move back to his hometown of Tucupita, Venezuela. Later, he immigrated once more, this time to Trinidad and Tobago. By that time, Leonardo had already been disabled for a considerable amount of time. An accident he had sustained when riding a motorcycle at a very young age had left him completely crippled. Unable to use his left arm, he seemed to have difficulty finding a job, even in the capital city of Ecuador. Andrina hardly spoke to Leonardo after moving to Cuenca. She only told him once that she had taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. A few months after splitting up with Leonardo, Andrina started dating Washington Andreas Aymaro, an Ecuadorian who lived nearby and, more significantly, owned the farm where Andrina worked. Andreas was raised in an affluent family. Andrina moved in with Andreas when Paula was about a year and a half old. On April 7, 2019, Andreas and Andrina welcomed a baby into their family, which made them all happier and more cohesive. However, everything changed on March 27, 2020, when an incident occurred that drastically altered everyone's lives. At that point, the family was content and enjoying their time together on the farm. That day, happy as it appeared, Andreas drove Paula to the flower plantations, where she became extremely ill. She vomited and dizziness set in, forcing Andreas to stop at a public restroom, whereupon Paula vomited once more. He decided to leave her alone for a short while, then went back to the car to get a change of clothes because all of the girls' clothes were filthy. When Andreas came back, he discovered Paula lying in the toilet bowl, with her head in the bowl. The man pulled her out of the bowl, attempted to administer first aid, and soon took her to the hospital. When the 4-year-old girl was brought to the attention of the doctors, they declared her dead. The doctors on duty conducted a preliminary examination and evaluated the girl's condition, and they found that Andreas's account contained many contradictions. For instance, they concluded at first that the girl had facial and body bruises, which were not consistent with the information her foster father had given them. In these kinds of situations, medical protocol calls for the doctors to call the police, and the circumstances themselves suggested as much. The girl's foster father claims that he gave Paula first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that all happened just 20 minutes before he took her to the hospital. However, the autopsy found that the girl had several broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which caused her death. It became apparent that Paula's death was not an accident, as her small body had a significant number of botched wounds. Shortly after, the police arrived, and Andreas was taken into custody as a suspect in Paula's murder. The girl's father, Leonardo Salazar, found out about Paula's passing on March 3rd, 3 days following the events. His mother, who was still in Venezuela, had called to tell him of his daughter's passing. She had heard from Andrina's friend. It should be noted that Andrina had severed all contact with Leonardo following their departure from Ecuador, and that's why for 3 days Leonardo was unaware of Paula's whereabouts. Her tragedy was that, up until then, all he had seen of her was in the pictures that Andrina and his mutual friends had sent him. Besides blocking Leonardo on all social media, Andrina also severed his connection with nearly all of Paula's family members, and even turned nearly all of their mutual friends against the girl's birth father by informing them of his lack of interest in speaking with Paula. Thus, it was that Leonardo was able to find out about his daughter's passing. But Andrina's family also told him that Paula passed away from complications brought on by COVID. At the time, Ecuador was quarantined due to the pandemic, just like the rest of the world, and there were essentially no deaths in the country from the coronavirus. No doubt Leonardo was highly suspicious that his daughter might have died from the virus, so he started looking up death statistics from the virus in Ecuador, which were posted on social media and news websites. Among the few victims of the virus in Ecuador at that time, Leonardo noticed that there were no children. After some help from his relatives, Leonardo started looking into the matter, and shortly after that, one of them sent him a newspaper article about Andreas's arrest on suspicion of Paula's death. After that, Leonardo started calling Andrina every day, and it wasn't until 10 days later that she decided to return his call that she rather icily informed him that Paula had passed away from COVID and that she was unable to provide any further information because her lawyers had forbidden her from doing so. Subsequently, Leonardo and a friend of his set up a Facebook page and an Instagram account named Justice for Paula. The posts went viral on social media, with the primary objective being the prosecution of those found guilty of his daughter's death. Andrina called Leonardo on the same day that she arrived at the morgue to handle her daughter's funeral. Despite the prosecutor's request for additional time to examine the body, the girl's funeral was held on April 10, 2020, because Andrina refused to have a second autopsy done on her. Thanks to the information posted on social media, Andrina's friends and people in her circle contacted Leonardo and told him about the sad life Paula had in the years before her death. They sent Leonardo the information they had, most of which was based on isolated recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and similar things. According to witnesses, ever since Paula's mother moved in with Andreas, the girl had to endure abuse from her stepfather, as well as her own mother. Not only did Andrina allow her daughter to be treated this way, but she herself was directly involved in all of this. Everyone said that they only saw Paula happy and cheerful when she was playing alone. In the presence of her stepfather, the girl looked depressed, acted shy, and became suddenly very frightful. At one point, the little girl told people she knew that her mother and stepfather beat her because she misbehaved. One day, she even confessed that as punishment, Andreas pushed her, and she hit her head on the wall. Paula called her stepfather nothing less than a monster, and was undoubtedly very afraid of him. The little girl constantly had nightmares, and as a young child she already suffered from insomnia. When the couple first moved into the stepfather's house, the girl, who was 2 years old at the time, was preferred to sleep alone. She would cry when she fell asleep, but no one would listen to her. Moreover, her mother Andrina had taught her how to cook when she was 2 years old, which was absurd because Paula's mother preferred to sleep in the mornings and take a break from the baby in the evenings.
Moreover, Andrina did not find it bothersome that the girl had to handle baking ovens on her own, even though it posed a safety hazard. The girl's teachers called the Special Police Organization so they could investigate the girl's abuse in her family. Officials took up the case and decided to send the girl somewhere she could be safe while the investigation process was underway. Thus, on October 16, 2019, Paula was temporarily transferred to her uncle, Andrina's brother. A hearing on the case was set for December 4th. The girl's constant complaints at the preschool where her mother had placed her, along with the bruises on her body, forced the teacher to show her to the doctors at the health center. After an examination, they concluded that the girl was being mistreated in the family. Paula's teachers were supposed to testify in 2019, but they were unable to attend this hearing for some reason. Consequently, a retrial was scheduled for February 27, 2020. But again, Paula's teachers failed to show up. The court was forced to dismiss all charges against Paula's parents, and she was given back to her mother on March 27th, exactly 1 month later. It is still unclear why the teachers refused to come to either of the two hearings, though it is thought that Andrina either bought them off or persuaded them that even though the girl had some issues, the parents had nothing to do with what their daughter had to say about them. Following Paula's passing, Andreas was placed under protective custody while the investigation was ongoing. However, he quickly filed an appeal against this ruling, and on June 12, 2020, a hearing was held in which the judge issued a restraining order and decided that Andreas could be released to house arrest. However, during the hearing, which took place via video conference, Andreas declared that he was dropping his appeal. While continuing his social media campaign at the time, Leonardo also asked his subscribers for financial support so that he could travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador in order to file a complaint against Paula's mother, Andrina, before it was too late. Luckily, Leonardo was able to secure enough financial aid in addition to receiving free legal advice from two Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro, who selflessly offered him support and assistance in the lawsuit. The pandemic had cancelled all services, so Leonardo had to cross the border between Trinidad and Venezuela, risk his life to float on a raft, and then cross the entire border from Naturing to San Cristobal. The pandemic also prevented him from using the usual routes to reach Ecuador, as all land and maritime borders of Venezuela were closed, leaving only a few regular flights to 4 or 5 countries to be counted in the upcoming months. After reaching the state of Táchira, Leonardo had to cross into Colombia over dangerously rough terrain, then take a bus to the town of Ipiales and travel through the plains and hills until he reached the Rumichaca Bridge, which marks the border between Ecuador and Colombia. From there, Leonardo took a taxi and drove to Quito, where he met with a lawyer on June 30th. As soon as he got there, the father of the dead girl filed a complaint against the ex-girlfriend, thereby making him a suspect in Paula's murder. Both Andreas and Andrina were charged with murder, which carries a maximum sentence of roughly 13 years in prison under the Ecuadorian Penal Code. On July 6, 2020, Andreas was indicted, and the woman appeared in court. The judge declared that the house arrest would be sufficient and that she would not need to be kept in custody. Additionally, the woman was ordered to report to justice twice a week. The case's initial hearing took place in November 2020. The trial's start date was not yet set. During the hearing, Andrina's attorney expressed concern about her potential for escape because she had attempted suicide before, and they requested that Andrina be fitted with an electronic monitoring bracelet. The judge granted the attorney's request, reducing the suspect's required number of court appearances to once per week from 2. However, Andrina's demands to re-evaluate the decision to wear an electronic bracelet were made a few days later, and on November 16th, another hearing was held to review the rulings. The trial of Andreas and Andrina was undoubtedly delayed by all these details, but thankfully the judge was able to set a date, and it was set for December. Most of the information found its way onto social media, and some of the facts were not reported because of the pandemic, which was a hot topic in the information field. On January 14, 2021, the trial got underway. At that point, Andrina's alternative forms of incarceration had not yet been decided upon, and Andreas was being held at the Regional Detention Center. The trial was conducted in private without the presence of media representatives, and some of the participants participated via video link. The girl's autopsy physician stated that Paula had almost all of her spinal discs replaced, that some of her ribs were broken, and some had already fused, indicating that the girl had previously experienced broken ribs that eventually healed on their own, and that she also had nail stigmata, a condition in which the nails grow in an abnormal way. Grow into the skin, scratches and bruises all over her body and face, fluid buildup in her lungs, scars on her head, and cuts on her intestines. The evaluation stated that the later injuries were what allowed the infection to proliferate and eventually result in sepsis, which was the cause of death. Paula had been dead for approximately 24 hours by the time Andreas brought her to the hospital, according to the autopsy report. The extent of the little girl's injuries, both internal and external, demonstrated the degree of cruelty she had endured and the negligence of her guardians, who had never once taken her to the doctor. In addition, the girl was malnourished, underweight, and too small for her age, with deficiencies in minerals and nutrition. In reference to Paula's wounds, Andrina, the girl's mother, attempted to persuade her family friends that Paula suffered from numerous psychological issues, which led to a propensity for self-torture as a means of drawing attention to herself. The girl's mother also claimed that after the birth of her younger brother, Paula stopped receiving attention from her parents, stopped sleeping through the night, and attempted to control everyone by sobbing. The trial also revealed that in October 2019, when Paula was supposed to stay in her uncle's custody in accordance with the board's decision, she actually continued to live with her parents and only spent a few nights sleeping at her uncle's house. In other words, the actions taken by the police organization did not have the desired outcome. Consequently, it was possible to establish that the girl started experiencing abuse in 2017, a few months after Leonardo left Ecuador. This abuse most likely started right after Andrina started dating Andreas. More than 40 witnesses for the accusing party testified during the trial, confirming the fact that Paula had to suffer abuse for at least 3 years of her brief life. At the final hearing, prior to the judge's verdict, Andrina admitted full responsibility for the abuse of the child, claiming that she had physically abused the girl with a belt and occasionally with her fists. By making this admission, the girl's mother actually attempted to shift the blame away from her husband, telling the court he was innocent, that he had no involvement, and that he had never mistreated Paula. Andrina also claimed that she had reprimanded her daughter for causing her problems with her new husband, saying that breaking up with him would have meant returning to the streets and losing the judges were worried about the couple's newborn son after learning about Paula's circumstances. But it's safe to say that this child was never abused. It is important to note that Andreas has in fact chosen to exercise his right to remain silent and hasn't said anything about the incident since his arrest. When Paula's trial came to an end on February 3, 2021, the couple was sentenced. They were both found guilty of killing the girl, a crime for which the maximum sentence is 13 years. The accusing party and Leonardo's original attorneys sought the maximum punishment for the perpetrators, but the chief judge decided to consider an aggravating factor, Paula's age of 4, which means that she was unable to defend herself against her attackers. As a result, Andrina and Andreas were sentenced to 17 years and 4 months in prison. Since the convicts in Ecuador have 3 days to appeal the verdict, the couple was expected to do so right away. Despite Andrina's 17 years and 4 months of prison sentence, she did not go to jail. Instead, she took advantage of her right to appeal, so the higher court now has to confirm her sentence for incarceration. Until then, she will continue to follow the original measures. Andreas, on the other hand, was arrested when he appeared at the hospital with a dead girl. Clearly, the public's outrage and displeasure over Andrina's continued freedom to remain at large is undoubtedly causing public outrage and anger, chief among them, Leonardo.